All right, let's jump right in. We're talking about two absolute giants of poetry, Alfred Lord Tennyson and Robert Browning. And here's the thing, they weren't just writing poems. They were rivals who, in their own completely different ways, managed to capture the very soul of one of the most fascinating and contradictory times in history, the Victorian age.
Now, to really get these poets, you have to get their world. The Victorian era, wow. It was an age of steam engines, mind-blowing scientific breakthroughs, and this huge sense of national pride and power. But just under that shiny surface of progress, there was this deep, gnawing anxiety, a feeling that all the old certainties were just crumbling away.
And it's right there, in that tension between the dazzling and the anxious, that the era's greatest artists found their work cut out for them. They had to try and make sense of it all.
I mean, the battle lines for the age were drawn so clearly. On one side, you had the pillars of the old world, faith, empire, a sense of order. And then, crashing against them, were these disruptive new forces, science, doubt, and just constant dizzying change. This was the divided world that Tennyson and Browning were born into.
So that brings us right to our big question. In an age that was literally being pulled in two different directions, how did these two poets, these two rivals, somehow become its definitive voices? Let's figure it out.
Okay, so first up, let's talk about the man who basically became the public face of Victorian poetry, Alfred Lord Tennyson. He wasn't just a voice of the era. For a lot of people, he was the voice. To really get Tennyson's role, you need to understand this idea of a representative poet. Now, this isn't just about being famous or popular. It means your work is like a giant mirror held up to society, perfectly reflecting back all its biggest hopes, its deepest fears, and the questions that kept everyone up at night.
So how did Tennyson pull this off? Well, for one, being named Poet Laureate in 1850 kind of made him the official national spokesman. But it was way more than that. His poetry went straight for the big issues. He wrote about that epic clash between faith and science. He celebrated things like patriotism and order. For a nation that was feeling totally overwhelmed by change, this was exactly what they needed, a voice of clarity and authority. He just had this incredibly polished, masterful skill that made people feel like, okay, maybe things will be all right. He basically set the gold standard.
Just look at this famous line from his masterpiece, In Memoriam, nature, red in tooth and claw. Wow! In just 6 words, Tennyson perfectly captured that terrifying new vision of the world that science and evolution were presenting. A world that wasn't about divine harmony, but about brutal, violent struggle. You can almost feel the entire country shuddering when they read that.
So at the end of the day, Tennyson looked at all the chaos and doubt of his age, and his poetry was his way of trying to find a path through it. He offered comfort, he created a sense of shared experience, and he held on to the belief that even in this crazy, changing world, you could still find order and meaning.
But that leads to a really interesting question, doesn't it? If Tennyson was the public voice, the one grappling with the nation's shared anxieties, who was digging into the private, messy, often much darker world of the individual mind?
And that's our cue. Enter Robert Browning, the great explorer of the human mind. Yeah, Browning wasn't interested in making anyone feel better. In fact, he did the exact opposite. He dove headfirst into all the messiness of human nature. While Tennyson was giving the public the order it craved, Browning was busy exploring the suspicion that underneath all that polite Victorian primness, things were way more complicated and a lot darker. His work is like this deep-sea dive into psychology, shining a light on flawed, self-deceiving, and morally questionable characters that proper society really preferred to ignore.
His real genius was his signature move, the dramatic monologue. Okay, so here's how it works. You have a single character, and they're talking, usually to someone who never speaks. They're telling you their side of the story. But as they keep talking, they start to accidentally reveal their real motives, their prejudices, their huge moral blind spots. And suddenly, we, the readers, we become detectives forced to piece together the real story that's hidden between the lines. It's brilliant.
And he had a whole toolkit to do this. He often set his poems way back in Renaissance Italy. Why? Well, it gave him a kind of safe distance to critique the power-hungry, corrupt, and hypocritical parts of his own Victorian society without pointing the finger too directly. He filled these poems with morally gray characters and was never afraid to use grotesque or just plain weird imagery to get at the unsettling truths of who we are.
And if you want to see just how far he'd go, look at this. This is the bone-chilling final line from his poem, Porphyria's Lover. It's spoken by a man who has just murdered the woman he supposedly loves, just to preserve that perfect moment forever. And the way he says it, so calm, so matter of fact, it is utterly disturbing. It's a shocking deep dive into madness and obsession, and it just shows you Browning was willing to go there.
So when you put these two poets side by side, you're really looking at a fundamental debate about the whole purpose of art itself.
What is art for, right? Is it supposed to be a comfort, a kind of balm for a troubled world, something to heal and unify us? Or is its real job to be more like a scalpel, to cut into uncomfortable truths and force us to confront all the stuff we'd rather leave hidden?
And the divide couldn't be clearer. You look at Tennyson, and the purpose of his art was to uplift, to reassure. His tone was harmonious and beautiful, and his focus was on those big, shared national questions. Then you've got Browning. His purpose was to investigate, expose, and provoke. His tone was ambiguous, ironic, often really unsettling, and his focus was squarely on the individual mind. One wanted to heal society, the other wanted to put it on an operating table. But here's the twist. They weren't just total opposites. To truly understand the Victorian age, you actually need both of them. Together, they give us the complete picture of the Victorian soul. And this is really the key takeaway. Think of it like this. Tennyson was the mirror. As the voice of the age, he reflected that grand collective experience, all the public hopes and fears of a nation. Browning, on the other hand, was the microscope. As the mind of the age, he zoomed way in, examining the hidden, complex, and often contradictory life of one person at a time.
See, you can't have one without the other to get the full story. Tennyson shows us the Victorian search for order, for faith, for some kind of stability. But then Browning comes along and shows us the private turmoil, the moral chaos, and the psychological cracks happening right underneath that polished surface.
When you read them together, that's when you get the complete portrait. You see an entire society caught in this epic tug-of-war between the perfect, orderly way it wanted to see itself and the messy, complicated, anxious reality of what was going on inside people's heads.
And that leaves us with one final thought, a question that is just as real for us today as it was back then. In our own era of rapid change and deep uncertainty, what do we need from our artists? Do we need a mirror to give us comfort and a sense of shared community? Or do we need a microscope to force us to confront the hard, uncomfortable truths about ourselves?